Tale of the Good Samaritan has a lot to tell us about our culture and our interior life. Welcome to this episode of Pearls of the Interior Life. Thank you for making this time for the Lord. Very good to be a part of that with you. Looking at the Good Samaritan this Sunday, that is the gospel reading. It's very fitting that it comes on the heels of the 4th of July. We were looking at the 4th of July and messages of unity within ourselves, unity with our neighbor, unity with God. And it becomes front and center here. So we're going to look at the Good Samaritan. We want to look at it spiritually, both in the context of society and the context of our interior life. Critical for both of them. First, let's start culturally, with our society and what it tells us. First, from a spiritual perspective, Good Samaritan. There's a traveler on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he gets beset by robbers. They strip him of everything, beat him, leave him half dead. Okay. Well, what about culturally? I would submit to you that culturally, since the Cultural Revolution of the 60s, that we have basically been robbed and left half dead spiritually. We've been robbed of our spiritual heritage and left just laid bare there, and again left half dead. Don't just take it from me. Take it from none other than Barack Obama.
Where we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation.
I have to say, he is completely accurate in that. Well, I'm going to have to go suck on a lemon to get the taste of those words out of my mouth. But he is. Notice his words. We are no longer a Christian nation. He doesn't just say we're not a Christian nation. We're no longer. What do? We gave up our heritage. We gave up our birthright. Gone. And he is correct about that. We once were a Christian nation, and we sure aren't anymore. What does that mean? It means we're half dead. The spiritual side of us is on life support. We're operating on fumes of what we had before. And just look even culturally, if we go back to the 60s and 70s, at the time of having our temper tantrum of our cultural adolescence, the language, though, was still Christian, just like a pop music. Go back to Simon and Garfunkel. The words of the prophets are written on the subway wall. Or James Taylor, look down upon me, Jesus, and help me make a stand. Or Jackson Browne, the benediction of the neon lights, and on. All of the references, the expressions, just our common language was Christian. Yes, the real guts and intent and the heart of it had been stripped away, but it just shows what was there. Or go back and look at old TV shows. Look at Andy Griffith or Little House on the Prairie or what have you. Would any of those be made today? We know the answer to that. But in very kind of superficial ways, it just shows where we came from. And again, just that echo or those fumes of Christianity that were carrying things through. Now, that's long gone now, right? That's it. Just put on the radio now, forget about it. And what do we see? What's the result of that? Just a descent into, and I say quite literally, to hell, because we get our taste of heaven or hell in this life, whatever we choose culturally. We're descending in. There's no aspect of life in which we are not poorer now. I would submit to you that holds even with our cultural original sin of slavery. Race relations have never been worse. Look at how far we've unwound things in the past 2 years, and we're seeing such tension between groups, critical race theory and all of that jazz. And all of this comes from the Marxist, communist approach to life, just that you need that constant class warfare, keeping us pitted against one another. And so now, whereas our cultural original sin of slavery had been largely healed through our cultural virtue of Christianity, we've just opened all those wounds right back up again. And heaven only knows where things are going to go now. But the point there is that constant class warfare, that Marxist, communist approach to things, and it naturally breaks us apart. It fractures us. Now we're tying more into that issue of unity that we were looking at in the 4th of July, that everyone senses this. Never have we had less unity in our United States. Why? Because our source of unity was our shared Christian heritage. Now that's been blown out of the water. Forget about it, especially now as this Marxist ideology, as relativism comes in, deconstruction, postmodernism, all the different isms and names for it. What does it do? It fractures us as a society. It compartmentalizes us in these nasty little boxes. But there's more to it than just unity. I mean, you have unity around some really bad things. It was our source of individual and shared meaning. The meaning of life, that you're made in the image and likeness of God, that you have a spiritual soul, that you have a God-given vocation, purpose in life for you specifically, that God has intended for you from the beginning of time. He knew you before the foundations of the earth were laid. He had plans for your greatness. He knitted you in your mother's womb. And the purpose of life was to listen and find what your calling was in life and understand how to become a fully integrated human being. This brings us to the education system, where the education used to be to make an integrated human being, someone who could really think and come to know God, come to know their purpose in the world. I don't have time for it now, but if you're not familiar with it, look up the Integrated Humanities program at Kansas State in the late 60s, early 70s, that went back to a traditional education, and the program was thriving and was also leading to lots of conversions to Christianity in a time when the culture was melting down. Not because it was teaching about God, it was just teaching how to be human, and that led people to God. And so they closed down the program. But we're digressing there. The point is, Christianity was our unifying principle as a society, also in building us as a society, because it's building us into fully realized human beings. What do we have now? Look at education, and we see that crushing view of communism, where people, they're just units of production. STEM. What are you? You're good at math. You're good at biology. You're good at physics, or whatever. We're gonna wring as much productivity as we can out of you there. This is an apt analogy. Physics. Let's say someone gets pigeonholed. You're going to be good at physics, but let's say they make you try to learn physics without studying math. Nearly impossible. Math is the language of physics. There might be just a few fortunate people that can just intuitively get it and figure it out. Everyone else is just going to flounder because they don't have any of the foundation for it. That's what Christianity is. Christianity is our foundation of being human, of being a society. Yes, there are a few people that just by God's grace latch on to the natural law. It's like that old spiritual, God bless the child who has his own, that just naturally get it. But for most of us, without having that foundation around us of a Christian society where we learn the tradition of our faith, we come to have that relationship with God and are shepherded along. For most of us, forget it. You are lost. And that is what we see today, that steady degradation of society because we've been robbed of our heritage. And that fracturing and that degradation is only going to continue unless and until something brings us on our knees of coming back to God, brings us to us. Okay, what about our interior? Well, the same forces that robbed society and left our society half dead want each of us individually. And if we give any kind of a crack, they will get in there. Let's go back to the Good Samaritan story. The traveler was traveling alone. Not wise. That was not usually people traveled in a caravan. Why? For safety, because there are bandits along the way. Not smart to be traveling alone. There are are for all of us parts of our interior where we try to go it alone. There's little pet sins that we have, and so on, where, God, you don't need to bother with this part of my life over here. And that's where the enemy wants to come in and get his foothold and rob us there. So it's very important that we do everything that we can in our interior life to bring God into all aspects so that we're always protected against the enemy. And this is much more, you're probably familiar with practicing the presence of God, just being aware of God during the day. Wonderful thing to do. Always looking to God in gratitude when something good happens, asking his guidance when we're not sure what to do, and so on. Brother Lawrence made this a particularly well articulated and realized practice. Great thing to do, but it goes deeper than that. To having that deep spiritual consciousness and awareness of God in our life. It's much like the distinction between virtue and gifts of the Spirit. Virtues are things that by and large we practice ourselves, yes, with God's grace, but they lead to the flourishing of the gifts of the Spirit. Take meekness and anger. Maybe we're given to having a hot temper, as I am. You pray for meekness, which is how we control our temper. Meekness is strength under control. The Lord, give me meekness. What does God do? He gives you chances to grow in meekness. He'll have all sorts of things come your way that would otherwise enrage you. People cutting you off on the highway and so on. So you can practice the virtue and grow in it. What happens eventually? At first, you do it just by main strength. All right, I'm going to be meek. You don't really feel it, but you keep a lid on it. After a while, it becomes more natural. Eventually it becomes second nature. It's actually a misnomer. What really happens is finally, eventually, our true nature comes out. We're created to be meek. It's because we've been disfigured by the fall that we have all these disordered aspects of our personality, but our true meek nature finally comes through. And now it just wells up naturally. We don't have to force it. When someone cuts us off on the road, we don't get all angry. We just pray for them. Lord, keep them safe. May they not injure anyone. If they're having a bad day, bring a little light into their day. It comes through naturally because we practice the virtue. The gift eventually comes. So too with the presence of God. We want to be practicing being aware of him to the point where suddenly we're just naturally aware. I used to love working outside with my dad, and I'm introverted. I actually tend to whistle a lot when I work. He was tickled by that. Dad wasn't nearly as much of an introvert, but especially when he was working outside, he loved working with his hands. He was great at it. He'd be very focused and he'd be quiet. Not a lot of words were spoken, but it was just wonderful. It was just so pleasurable working together. Even if we were in different parts of the yard, kind of doing different things, just knowing he was out there, that we were doing this shared activity together. Some of my happiest memories of being with Dad. Again, there wasn't necessarily a lot of exchange. There wasn't me consciously thinking, oh, there's Dad. There was just this awareness that we're out there, we're sharing in this together. And that's what we're getting at with where we want to be in our interior, of just constantly being in the presence of God. Now, no robber can assail us anywhere. That's what we always want to be working towards, where we're perfectly united with God in our interior. Now we're bulletproof. Now we can go out into the world. All right, this brings us in closing back to society. What do we do about society? We do the best to get our own house in order. What do? Well, certainly we do our best to bring God to the forefront in word or in deed. It's much like with the story of the Good Samaritan. He takes the traveler, puts him on horseback, brings him to the innkeeper to nurse him back to health. But were it that simple to do for society of just having physical wounds to heal? The spiritual wounds, unfortunately, again, we have three enemies working against us. And often there's only so much that we can do by actual word and deed. It's a lot. Just a few days ago, we had the scripture, Christ sending out the disciples 2 by 2, going to the town. If they won't hear you, then leave, kick the dust from your feet. Why? Because move on. They're not going to hear. You've delivered the message. You've done your job, what you can do. Move on now. Go reach out to others. But it doesn't mean you give up hope or just leave them behind. Far from it. It's just now you turn it over to Christ. We're on a mission of mercy, not justice. Christ tells us, I desire mercy, not justice. So the bigger part really that we can most often do is through our prayer, through our offering, through our small sacrifices, just those areas where it becomes aware to us of the brokenness, be it if it's large movements that we have a heart for, just all the confusion around the trans issues or CRT or so on. Well, really invest in that, in prayer and intercession and sacrifice. If it's for our very misguided leaders, think of Pelosi or Biden, who are going down a very dangerous path because they probably know better. Who knows exactly what's going on in their heart, but boy, their actions and their decisions are not good. To pray, to intercede, to offer reparation for the terrible laws that they're supporting and enacting. No individual, no community, no society is ever beyond God's redeeming touch. And the best things that we can do then, again, keep our spiritual house in order so that we can be a good Samaritan when, where, and how God calls us to be. With that, I look forward to being with you again. Blessings to you on your journey with Christ.